it was a very interesting previous session, and I'm sure the next one will be just as interesting. We have a very distinguished panel again, equally as distinguished as our previous panel, a very knowledgeable panel. I'll briefly introduce them. So we have Professor Miia Martinsuo, who's Professor of Industrial Management at Tampere University in Finland, and she's a global expert in projects, portfolios, and innovation. Professor Jonas Söderlund, who's a professor at the University of Linkoping in Sweden and an adjunct professor at the BI Business School in Oslo in neighboring Norway, is a specialist in strategy, capabilities, projects, knowledge integration, and new organizational forms. And Killen is a professor at the University of Technology, Sydney, where her research specializes in project portfolio management and innovation. So the topic for this session is temporary multi-level organizing across portfolios and programs. And to frame our discussion, we have three quite broad and open questions. And these are related to the role of visualization, the role of dynamic capabilities, and of dynamic organization learning in temporary multi-level organizing across portfolios, programs, and projects. So each of these relate project management to a broader context of strategy and management and organization studies. And increasingly, project management is being framed by broader transdisciplinary relevances in the way it addresses contemporary technological developments, changing social values, and grand challenges. So I want to kick off proceedings by first asking Kathy, if she will, to open the discussion with the issues that are crucial for her at the present time in terms of the agenda that's just been framed. Kathy, good evening.
Good evening. I hope you can hear me properly.
We can.
Good. Thank you, Stewart. It's great to be here, and I look forward to discussing this with you all. Now, my research, talking about these different levels of research, my research is focused at the portfolio level, the higher level above projects that organizations need in order to align with strategy and gain the best value. And when we talk about value, as we've mentioned many times in the symposium, it's not just profit. So my research looks at the capabilities for doing these things through a portfolio perspective, aligning people, projects, processes, and structures in that capability building. So earlier, Jennifer White did mention that it is more than how projects are done. That's obviously very important, but which projects to do is one of the growing questions. And that's the really central question when we're talking about strategically managing across a portfolio. With limited resources, how do we select the right projects? And that could be projects for developing products, for developing bids for large infrastructure projects. It's quite diverse. So I guess to open our discussion, I'll just point out two themes from my research interests that align with this theme that you've explained, Stewart. And the first one is emerging strategy, and strategy emergence. Strategy, as we've discussed, is no longer thought of as something static, and it shouldn't be static, especially in our changing environments. And emerging strategies that develop within organizations help organizations understand what's happening in their environment and where their change might be going. So research has been showing how portfolio level structures and portfolio level processes actually help in identifying emergence and can provide mechanisms to recognize and sort of promote emergence. And so something we've talked about in our research is planned emergence, which may sound very contradictory, but it's something I can discuss more later if we have time. But this is related to the broader work on dynamic capability as well, about the way these capabilities can provide timely response to change. So just quickly moving on to another topic we can open for discussion, and this is quite different, but also related to the changing world we're operating in, and that is the use of visualizations. So we have a changing world where visuals are everywhere. Everybody has them in every aspect of their life, and our workplaces are no different. We have this situation where data is just volumes of data are available with increasing digitalization. And there are tools to create visuals, but how can we harness those visuals for best delivery, best decision making? Quite a lot of my research has been looking at this from a number of quantitative and qualitative perspectives. And what we understand is that, yes, visuals can assist. They can help reduce the cognitive load in understanding data to make decisions. But visuals can also confuse, they can bias, they can mislead. And the data underpinning the visuals may not be complete and may not be, well, it's always got some level of bias. How can we understand the data and make the best decisions? So big questions, very relevant in today's world. And the other issue is educating our practitioners to be visually literate, to be able to critically analyze and use visuals effectively. So I'll stop there for now and pass on to other panelists and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Kathy. You've set a nice agenda there. Which projects, rather than what's going on in the project, we should be thinking about which projects we're going to pursue, the discussion of visualization and how to make project managers capable of handling visualization, because it's a very recent phenomenon, relatively, and particularly for the older project manager, it may be a quite foreign world. So I think those are very, very real questions. Let's see what Jonas can contribute to the conversation.
All right. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I will address more of the issue of maybe dynamics of projects and relate that to sort of dynamic capabilities and capabilities of running projects. I will start with a fairly, let's say, theoretical and research-oriented touch to it, but I will come to the practical implications later on as I speak. So, starting out then, I would like to address the issue of meta theories to advance our general understanding of projects and the way we manage and organize projects. And meta theories have really played a central role for advancing project studies in recent years, such as learning theories, institutional theories. They have been important approaches to advance cross-fertilization between fields in general, yes, but they have also played a central role for advancing project studies in recent years, for instance, across innovation studies and project studies. And these meta theories have played a significant role, not only in living research within the domain of project studies, but they have also shown the potential sort of project studies as a vivid field, an area of research that could also contribute to management and organization studies more generally. And that's respect. Project studies and the field of project management have become much more interesting for managers in general, but also for management scholars in general. And meta theories, they serve a very important purpose for actually bridging that particular element. And they provide a sort of, or foster a providential cross-fertilization because they offer a generic language that is applicable across domains. They also encourage scholars to question established assumptions and adapt theorizing to changing empirical realities rather than adhere to narrow ideologies. They make us more aware of sort of the bigger issues. They make us more aware of societal issues in general. And in other words, meta theories provide a common basis and thereby guide a genuine dialogue between academic fields, between different backgrounds, between different professions, and so on. And drawing on the idea of meta theories and at the same time acknowledging the centrality of multi-level analysis, what seems to be needed are meta theories with the capability of grasping several levels of analysis. That makes sense at the individual level, for people working in projects, for people managing projects, at the project level, as well as the broader societal level. And indeed, learning theories proved a good example for that. Institutional theory, another one. But I would like to suggest a third opening. and one that I think could establish a stronger theoretical ground for the field of project studies, but also for the acts and practice of project management. It would then simultaneously provide openings for a broader contribution of the field of project studies and make it more interesting as a particular sort of area of management, if you wish. It would become more interesting for other scientific domains by that. Well, and to frame that background, I want to say that temporary organizations are often implemented as accelerators to speed things up due to accelerating and other temporal limitations of permanent organizations. And this has further spurred the interest in advancing our knowledge of time and temporality in organizations. And this is where I'm coming to. And more recently, how organizations and individuals experience time and changes of time in time. And as a consequence, temporality has gradually become a central topic in organization and management studies. And for many years, conversations around temporality, how people relate to time, how people embrace time, how people perceive time in different ways, tended to stay predominantly at the very abstract and theoretical levels, which had the positive effect that scholars became increasingly aware of the many facets and forms of temporality in organizations, especially for advancing their dynamics, but not necessarily providing openings for empirical research and multi-level explorations of temporality in practice. So it is well known that temporal orders make organizations effective and able to cope with requirements stemming from institutional isochronism. That is, that people relate to time in somewhat similar ways to promote efficiency, to promote collaboration. However, that same isochronism may cause fundamental difficulties when organizations collaborate with organizations adhering to a different temporal order. And recent studies of temporality have become increasingly empirical and thus also able to better advance our understanding of the challenges facing organizations with regards to temporal requirements and temporal asymmetries. And projects, multi-level projects, seem particularly relevant for such explorations and for demonstrating how temporality plays out in inter-organizational collaborations. And the study of temporary organizations may thus grasp how temporal tensions are continuously, visibly, and explicitly enacted in the design activities and temporal practices across multiple organizational levels and across multiple organizational boundaries, for instance, through deadlines, timelines, and temporal routines. And these temporal practices provide a basis for negotiation over interpretations of time, how to coordinate activities, in which order and when to conduct activities. And the visibility and ongoing negotiation of multiple and sometimes incompatible temporal orders is especially apparent in inter-organizational collaborations with multiple and diverging stakeholders. And in these settings, it is particularly important to investigate actors' agentic interpretations and modifications of temporal orders, how they can influence the temporal order, negotiate temporal order to fit the project purpose and make the project progress. And here is sort of the practical implications of that. And that is, by adopting an agentic view of temporal tensions, we transform time from being a passive entity into becoming an active verb of how managers take active part in creating, reconciling, legitimizing, or balancing temporal tensions. That is, in complex project settings, it is not always possible or desirable to resolve temporal tensions by, for example, completely aligning temporal orders due to urgency and time pressure of the mission, but rather to learn how to maintain temporal tension, without entering endless fights around temporal values, views, and practices. And to conclude, multiple temporal organizations will most likely not agree upon a collectively entrained temporal order or a wide-ranging isochronism of the fact that people relate to time in the same way, but may probably serve a dual purpose of temporal harmony, some form of temporary reconciliation among temporal orders, and temporal conflicts, inconsistencies, negotiations, power games of temporal orders to not fall apart, yet maintain its reason to live. And they live under the pressure of a deadline. They thrive on the conflict of temporal tensions. Managers who understand these conditions and are able to promote temporal conflict and live by it while keeping it at bay seem more successful, especially in complex multi-level projects.
Well, thank you very much, Jonas. That's quite an agenda for us. Just summarizing my notes, I think that we've covered the role of meta theories, particularly learning and institutional theories, the relationship of project management to its embeddedness and relatedness to management and organization studies. We've looked to a common basis for research in the area, and we've looked at temporary organizations as accelerators, how time and temporality and time and change of time can function in projects, and that very interesting suggestion that project management adds realism to abstract theories of time. It makes them empirically material, it makes them empirically real, particularly when we're looking at asynchrony in projects where people are working with different time reckoning systems. The way in which they're constituting time differs greatly. An example of the difference, just to go back to Kathy's points about visualization, when newspapers switched from print to digital, they still maintained institutions like deadline meetings, but they didn't need them anymore. But it was so ingrained as a habit that they continued to do so. And those sorts of habits, which precede the kinds of availabilities and affordances that we have now, are things that we need to factor into the way in which we think about these things. Very stimulating. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Jonas. And Miia, your turn to enter the ring. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. My interest is also in the multi-project entities or organizations, including programs and portfolios. And I will kind of look at this from the portfolio viewpoint right now, which also includes programs very often. Very often the focus is on selecting the projects into the portfolio in line with strategy. So there's a strategy connection and there's a need and something like that. So there's kind of a good awareness of the screening and selection processes for portfolios in the early phase of the portfolio. However, then my question is, what happens afterwards? So a lot of things change over time. The context changes. There are different needs for the projects. Resources may change. Managers may change their strategies on the way. So I have been particularly interested in the uncertainties and context connections and dynamics in the portfolios once they are selected. So what happens there? There's a lot of path dependency there. People actually decide differently over time because they receive new information. And the issue of monitoring and control after the selection of the portfolio is, I think, much more weakly understood than the selection process itself. There are lots of studies that look into what explains portfolio success, but they don't exactly say what that success is. So what was the strategy that was fulfilled? What was the performance that was actually reached? So it's not sufficient to say that portfolios performed on average like this. What was the actual result? What was the actual outcome there? So I think when we look at the dynamics of portfolios, what occurs over time, there's a lot of change and uncertainty that somehow needs to be taken into account, and there's a need to reconfigure the portfolios over time. So that's what I've been studying recently with my colleagues. We looked into 4 medium-sized organizations and their portfolios and 3 large firms and their several portfolios. And one of the things that we put our attention to is the fact that the portfolios are intertwined somehow, so they are connected with each other. Something happens on the boundaries of portfolios, and I think that's quite important to understand, people, for instance, might be participating in the projects of different portfolios, the research portfolios and the technology development portfolios and the product development portfolios, which might be separate portfolios. The same people go through them. Another thing that I want to take up here is that companies do have their portfolio management systems that feature various things, but a lot of the dynamics that take place in the portfolios happen in very informal ways, through a communication of strategies, through a communication of changes and uncertainties, through the involvement of stakeholders. Another thing that I want to point out here is that when we went to those portfolios and asked those people about the practices of connecting the different levels, the strategy connection to the portfolios and projects, people don't talk about the structures at all. So that's something that is very self-evident there somehow. So I think the structural issues regarding portfolios and their dynamics and their external connections are also quite important. So with these words, perhaps the words of path dependence, strategy connection, and structural connection are something to recall from this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Miia. So what I took from you is the importance of selecting projects into the portfolio, but then also, much more importantly, looking at how the portfolio changes over time, how it's adapted, how times and personnel change, and not enough attention paid to that, the focus being more on the front end, building the portfolio, selecting the portfolio, rather than running and coordinating the processes of the portfolio. And again, you had a strong inference on processes, the processes of monitoring and auditing and controlling portfolios, to the extent to which those were in place. You were interested also in how informal strategies in practice have much more to do with what actually transpires than the formal strategy or the formal structure, that people don't really bother about the formal structure, which, when you think about all the work that goes into designing and selecting the portfolio, is quite an interesting finding. Okay, let me throw it back now to Jonas and Kathy for some further comments, and let's try and get a strategic conversations going between the three of you. Who wants to kick off? Well, I'll invite Kathy.
Right. Well, lots of things come to mind hearing the points raised by both of my colleagues. And I was trying to figure out which one to start with. But I think one of the biggest issues when we're talking about the ongoing management of projects that have made it to the portfolio, so there's been a process that involves many different considerations, different people, structures, to form the portfolio. And it's true that much more attention is paid there, but the portfolio decisions are best made with the context of the entire portfolio of ongoing projects, as they're still consuming resources. And the most difficult decisions seem to be those decisions to actually cancel and put the money elsewhere. You know, there's that fallacy of spent resources. Somehow we keep on pumping money in. But I think that's one interesting area to explore is how organizations can do that better. When I talk to organizations, I'm impressed with some that actually do it well, that actually say that they can, but by and large, most organizations will acknowledge the importance of reallocating resources when times change, away from projects that no longer look like the good projects they were when they were chosen, to the more promising things. So I think that's an area for research, as well as, you know, for highlighting to practitioners.
What do the attributes of the good project portfolio management look like, Kathy?
Good project portfolio management depends on the context. So a lot of research is done to try to say, you know, what works. We benchmark how people do things and what sort of performance they get. And that performance can be measured in a number of ways, but we look for return on investment, as well as, say, leadership in technologies or other strategic kind of performance.
Those are outcomes. I was thinking more about process.
About the processes that lead to those outcomes.
Yeah.
When we study the benchmarking, we're benchmarking the processes and linking with the outcomes and identifying the processes that are more successful, with more aligned with outcomes. But of course, we can't prove causality in those sort of survey-based benchmark studies. So we've also done a lot of interview-based, qualitative-based research to try to tease it out more. But what does good portfolio management look like? It involves a lot of transparency and communication, a good trust in the system, that people participate actively and understand why information needs to be current and shared so that the best decisions can be made. It's very different in different environments. So another theme of our research is to look at different contexts and understand how portfolio management is working in those contexts. A lot of times we look at formality and consistency being a hallmark of good portfolio management, but in a dynamic environment, in some situations, we don't need too much of that. So it's really contextual. And right now we're looking at the construction industry, which hasn't normally been thought of as a traditional portfolio management environment. We have a budget to do our developments, but indeed they're doing a lot of strategizing about the budget for bidding for those big projects. And that's a really strategic and interesting portfolio exercise. So I can say a lot about these things, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight.
Okay, Jonas, your experience with the project linking the emergency services would suggest that a fair degree of lack of trust and asynchrony actually occurs.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to also connect to the project portfolio issues, because we've done some research on that with the temporality in mind. And I think for me, answering sort of the question of what is successful project portfolio management from a temporality point of view, it is obviously related to understanding the rhythm of sort of the project process, of dividing different projects into different categories of projects, depending on sort of the rhythm, pace of various projects within that. And in that sense of understanding sort of the time-paced evolution of projects, the deadlines, you mentioned sort of one such example, Stewart, earlier, with certain deadlines that are kept, although sort of society or technology has changed. That is another issue that we also see in our research, that you understand sort of the rhythm when certain things best support the decision making as such, but also best support the project progress, so to speak. And I think that because we know that providing control or providing feedback too early is not good for certain projects, and too late is not good for obvious reasons as well, but actually knowing when to do certain things and have an understanding of the rhythm of the project portfolio is, from my point of view, with the temporality issues in mind, absolutely critical, and which is also then critical for actually managing the flow of projects once it's sort of the decisions have been taken on what projects to pursue.
Okay, we're getting quite a few questions coming up now, and the first one I'd like to raise is addressed to Miia. Some interesting observations there. I'd be interested to know, this is from Faye Homan, I'd be interested to know if the portfolios were functionally based or a construct of funding or something else, whether there was a consistency or other in the role of the PMO or strategy realization delivery office or value management office. Miia, question for you.
Our studies have related to innovation. So they were kind of functionally based in the sense that certain research people are in their own unit, whereas technology development and product development people might be in their own unit. However, all projects tend to be cross-functional anyway. So in that sense, also the portfolios have to be cross-functional because they involve people from multiple different, the projects include people from multiple different functions. I can't respond to the latter part of the question. I kind of don't see the connection to our data.
Okay.
The organizations didn't speak about value management or delivery offices or such. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay. No problems. A question from Suhair to everyone. I think in most developing countries, when a government is selected, the ministers, they select specific portfolios, including socio-economic development portfolios. However, due to political issues, the government might be dismissed, sometimes in less than 1 year. A new government comes, and most of the time they start new portfolios. So my question is how to make sure that certain portfolios are maintained despite changing the government, how to maintain consistency and to take on previous or ongoing portfolios. So obviously an issue in developing countries, but sometimes in developed countries as well. I mean, we've had evidence of these things happening in Australia. The famous example of the freeway that was going to be built in Melbourne, and then the government changed and it wasn't going to be built. So anybody want to have a go at that one?
Can I have a go?
Sure.
I think this is a fantastic question, and I'm seeing this in practice right now. So Finnish government, for instance, previously decided that they will centralize universities, and now they have decided to decentralize. So just in a couple of years, the whole strategy changes, and then suddenly a very major issue happens. I think one potential resolution for that is to have a very clear investment program that spans very long time. So like 15 years program instead of a 4-year or 1-year program. So I think the program approach might help in those kinds of issues where you really tie your investments to certain things, and you have to connect the different governments, the consequent governments, to the same program. So some issues could be bound to a longer term program, and that's fixed. That's part of the budget. But then there might be the shorter term portfolios that might change based on whatever the government is. And I think it needs to be somehow acknowledged that certain programs and projects are such that they really tie the funds, and you can't really terminate the projects in the middle. So I think that might be one way to go.
Well, I think things must be a little bit better in Finland than they are in Australia, because really our projects seem to be tied very tightly to electoral cycles, which we have elections, federal elections every 3 years. So there is it doesn't need to be a developing country to see the kinds of discontinuities that can occur. We have another question, one for Jonas. Are temporal tensions related to space? And if so, how?
Well, I think it's related to space in many ways, I would say. But one particular way is that space is producing certain temporalities. So where I am can certainly influence how I perceive time. And depending on where I am located, I can perceive time in a very different way. So there could be certain offices or certain layouts of offices or certain organizational structures, if that is part of sort of the space dimension, that could produce certain ways of understanding relating to time, for sure. So there is a clear, in practice, there are many connections to it, but from a research point of view, we might want to keep it separate for simplicity reasons, if you see what I mean. But there are several connections to space and time, which is also something that has been addressed in recent research. Yes.
Okay. I'll come back on that one in a minute or two, but Kathy's just said to me that she could address the PMO question if needed. So Kathy, please do.
Right. Yes, I think that the question about the PMO being a point of integration across multiple portfolios, Miia might not have seen that in their research, particularly when focusing on innovation projects. My findings are as well that these centralized formal structures are less likely to be around. But what I have found is there, again, no one size fits all, and things change over time. So most of these types of processes, in my observations and our research, have shown that organizations are trying out to see what works, and nothing seems to be stable for a very long time yet. And I think they're still working out for each environment how that will best work. For example, EPMO, might be thought of as a project management office, might be thought of as a portfolio management office. It may focus more on project structures and controls and consistency, but sometimes they are actually integrating multiple portfolios and working across an organization. So I've seen quite commonly where the EPMO works across projects, across multiple portfolios, but doesn't necessarily look at the portfolio management structures themselves. And I've seen others where the portfolio management as well is tried to be a bit more consistent through the EPMO oversight. So I hope that helps. I don't have enough data to show what's working best in which environments, but I'm very interested in the way that most organizations I talk to have tried, say, a bit more EPMO involvement and then step back, or the staff have changed. It's evolving as these things happen.
Okay, I'd like to just pick up on a point that Jonas made, and then I'll bring up another question from the chat, and that was about space and time. I mean, we've gone through a very fascinating period in the last, a very traumatic period in the last 18 months or so with COVID-19, which has changed conceptions of space and time greatly, because people have been largely working from home using the affordances of digital media and the visualization that it occurs, which means that domestic space and working space have often conflicted and run into each other. Children don't necessarily understand the demands of the digital world of work that's being done from home. In the newspapers today, the Prime Minister of New Zealand was interrupted giving a talk to the nation by her daughter, who wanted a bedtime story. And this is not atypical, I think, in family life. So clearly, one of the ways in which the tensions between space and time get to be handled is by putting everybody together in the same space. But we now are at a conjuncture where that may not be the preferred strategy for the future. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? Projects which are spatially disconnected? No central project office, not everybody working together. Particularly globally, because then, of course, the temporality and the spatiality issues are very interfacing.
I find this is a very interesting topic. I haven't researched it directly, but there's some interesting work reported on global development projects, such as the Boeing Dreamliner, on different time zones, different countries, with data sharing being one of the big facilitators. So having central models, and this goes back to that whole digitalization and digital models and how they can unite and inform the project teams. So if you're not co-located and not even temporarily aligned, those sort of data banks are a big important aspect of success.
Any other contributions, or shall I move on to the remaining questions?
I can comment on that. So this whole kind of disconnect brings me back to the issue of potential overlaps and lack of synergies and those kinds of bad things that are kind of known in portfolio. So if you disconnect things, if you don't have them in the same portfolio, you suddenly do overlapping work, you do inefficient work. But I don't think it has to necessarily be structural arrangement. It could be just a broker person. It could be somebody who kind of ties the knots together and looks into the whole thing every now and then. So I think in that way, even if the projects were, or portfolios even were spatially disconnected, then there needs to be some sort of an information connection point somewhere, which can avoid the low efficiency, the overlapping work, the repetitive work, the lack of synergy, those kinds of bad things that happen when projects are not connected.
Okay.
And I want to add that I think this conversation or this debate about what will come after sort of the more remote work lessons learned has to do with modularization as well, how we divide projects into smaller parts, whether we will go for large projects to the same extent that we've done in the past. I'm not sure if you saw the special issue of Harvard Business Review that had one paper, one article specifically about that, questioning sort of the underlying reasons for doing the mega projects or doing very large projects, trying to divide them in different parts and go for smaller projects, which would then clearly make us more aware of the role of project portfolio management in general, but it would also then make us more aware of how we connect different projects together, and also how and whether what will happen with sort of the efficiencies that certainly come out of doing projects in a coordinated or centralized way. Will there be certain projects that we will not be able to do in such a future?
Yeah, clearly, there's I mean that we have the choices. I mean, we can build dams or I think we've got to the wrap-up stage. I think I've been usurped by someone, but that's okay. Well, look, I'd like to really thank you all very much. There's so much more we could have talked about. We've run out of time. We still had some lovely questions that we could have addressed, but it's been really fascinating. So thank you all very much indeed. And I think I should hand over to someone else at this stage, because the next session starts in 1 minute and 38 seconds. I think Jennifer might be the person I'm going to hand over to.
Yeah, so I think you're handing back to me, and I think people are not taking the 2 minutes to wrap up. I don't know if there are any final thoughts from the speakers before you disappear. You're welcome to share a final thought. And can I please encourage you to have a look at the chat, because there's been a lot coming through on the chat that's highly relevant, and perhaps you can respond to it in the chat, or we can send you the comments offline. We had a more interactive session in the morning, and I think we would plan to run this again next year. And I think next year we'll also build an interactive session into the evening session, so that we can engage with you in a slightly different way, rather than in the confines of a webinar system. Because yeah, I think one of the great pleasures of having us together across continents is to be able to converse and talk and to engage with each other. I've really learned a lot in those 2 sessions, and they were fantastically interesting. And so I'd really like to thank our colleagues who've joined us today, and please do show your appreciation in the chat. So that's the way we've found of getting around the confines of the virtual system and giving a kind of virtual clap to our colleagues. I'm going to hand over to Margaret to say a few closing words, and then I'll just come on at the very end.
Thanks, Jennifer. It's been a fabulous session this evening, and for those who've been part of the morning session, there's been lots to think about, and great insights shared from both practitioners and from academics. So those in the regions, yes, you've got your day ahead of you, but our day is closing out. I will share all the links and publications, and please register your interest in keeping connected with the Institute by some of our semi-regular correspondence that we've got through our newsletter. I suspect you're aware of us through our social media and are informed by what we're doing through those channels, but we really would appreciate if you can amplify our messages to your network. Professor Andy Davies will talk on innovation in the London mega project ecology as part of our University and Faculty of Engineering Distinguished Lecture Series at the University on the 7th of December. Those registrations links will come out soon, so kind of keep that time in your diary. I think it's 7 p.m. in the evening. As Jennifer has indicated, we really want to be the go-to place for project leadership and continue the outstanding links we have internationally and nationally that have been demonstrated tonight. Most importantly, we want to build and grow an institute and have long-term and deep relationships and concrete ways to keep engaged with us are, like, we have our flagship Executive Leadership in Major Projects program. And if you're wanting more information for yourself or your colleagues or your staff, please email me at the John Grill Institute, and I'll be in touch. I'll put in the chat a link to the website for if you want to register for more information, and also my email. We're also doing customised programs for organisations and governments. They're intensives that provide some kind of contextual, will provide a contextual uplift for your organisation, so a little bit more focused. Also, over the next 18 months, we'll be hosting strategic conversations on themes that the Institute feel are worthwhile that we share, but we'd also like to hear from you in regard to the themes and topics that you want us to host. Clearly, our passion is for evidence-based practice in driving which is driving our commitment and enthusiasm for collaboration. So conversations in how we can partner in research, either through linkage opportunities, and to understand how together we can pursue those possibilities of building the evidence to improve project leadership. So I look forward to keep being in touch with you. As I said, I'll include my email and website so we can open the conversation and help facilitate those links with our research and the great people we have in the Institute and part of our networks. So Jennifer, if you want to, I'll just pass over to you for close out.
I mean, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us virtually in Sydney. And on the slide, there's a picture of our beautiful campus here. And the University of Sydney is 170 years old. It's the oldest university in Australia. And our Vice-Chancellor would tell you that on our own, we would be the 5th largest city in New South Wales. So we're quite a large university here, and actually a large university internationally, with the number of students that we have. We have 1,000 full-time equivalent students doing project management courses at the University of Sydney. And so we're really delighted to be able to kind of foster an international conversation about project leadership, and I know that this will continue in the various conferences that we attend as international scholars. But today has really been an opportunity to bring some industry partners and some academics together, and so we've had a conversation that's touched on practical issues and also on the kind of leading edge of research and where research is going to in the future. And I was thinking as we were wrapping up, you know, I've learned a lot through the day, and it's been really fantastic to hear from the various contributors. And I was thinking, you know, what's missing in our conversations? What would we want to bring in next year when we run this again? And you know, I think if you have thoughts on that, please do put them into the chat, because I think our plan is to run a symposium like this next year. I think one of the challenges in Australia is that we're engaging with different time zones. So we had a session in the morning to try and engage with Asia and the Americas, this session in the evening to try and engage more with Europe. But that's meant, of course, that my team behind the scenes have been working for 12 hours at this point. Yeah, and so I think we do have to offer a real heartfelt thanks to Tamara and to Nikki, who've been running around behind the scenes trying to hold the technology together. And I think, as all of you know, if you have Zoom meetings yourself, then you know, that can be quite stressful. It can be quite challenging when you've got a large audience on a webinar. So definitely my virtual thanks, and I'm sure people will be putting thanks into chat for the people who've provided the support for the session, whether they've appeared on the screen or whether they've been helping us from behind the scenes. I know that this is a conversation that will continue, and I hope that we can engage other parts of the world in that conversation. There's a lot of projects going on in places like China, and it would be really great to be hearing from them next year. It would be great to be hearing you know, and comparing and contrasting how projects are being organised in different parts of the world. And so as I say, we're hoping to run a similar event. We'd be very keen to get your feedback. I really have enjoyed your contributions, and thank you for coming and joining us. And in these days of COVID, I imagine that most of you don't have that far to travel home. I think we do have a final slide which just shows you a little bit of the beautiful city here. And even if your journey home is just you know, sort of from the computer screen to grab a cup of coffee if you're in the morning, or if you're you know, or if you're in your office, maybe you have a little further when you travel home at the end of the day. But safe journey home, and thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.